Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. So there I was, right, just wandering around this quiet little town in the middle of nowhere. It was one of those places you probably miss if you blinked while driving past it. Now ain't a local or anything, just passing through on a little solo road trip, trying to clear my head. It was late afternoon, and I figured I'd stretch my legs and maybe grab a bite to eat in this strange, sleepy town. The sun was already dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows across the deserted streets. You know that eerie feeling you get when you just know something's off? Yeah, I had that feeling. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I had the sensation that I was being watched. The silence was almost deafening, except for the soft sound of my footsteps echoing down the empty streets. I passed by a few small shops and houses, all of them looking like they hadn't seen life in years. Their windows were grimy, and the paint was peeling from their walls. It was like the whole town had just up and left, leaving everything behind. I found it so weird and creepy, but still, my curiosity got the better of me, and I continued exploring. As I walked further into town, I noticed that the streetlights were flickering, barely providing enough light to see. The darkness seemed to be closing in around me, and the shadows seemed to grow longer and more sinister. I could feel my heartbeat quickening, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. After all, what could possibly happen in a place like this? I turned down a narrow alley, hoping to find a quicker route back to my car. But as I did, I heard something behind me, like the rustling of leaves. I turned, but there was nothing there. I shook it off and continued walking, but the feeling of being watched persisted. The alley was dark and narrow, with tall buildings on either side. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, and I felt a sense of impending doom. I picked up my pace, my footsteps echoing loudly in the confined space. The further I went, the more I felt like I was being followed. My heart raced as I thought about what could be lurking in the shadows. Just as I was about to turn the corner and leave the alley, I heard a loud crash behind me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned slowly, praying it was just a stray cat or something. But there was nothing there, just a broken streetlight, its shattered glass reflecting the faint moonlight. I couldn't take it anymore. My instincts screamed at me to get out of there as fast as I could. So I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The streets were a blur as I sprinted, desperate to escape the suffocating darkness that seemed to swallow the town whole. Finally, I saw the outline of my car up ahead, and relief washed over me. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I practically threw myself into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath and calm down. As my breathing slowly returned to normal, I glanced around, my eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness. The town looked even more sinister from the safety of my car. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something was definitely off about this place. I started the engine and turned on the headlights, illuminating the empty street in front of me. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I drove down the main street, my eyes darting from side to side, half expecting something to jump out at me. But there was nothing, just the eerie stillness of the town. As I approached the town's exit, I noticed something strange. The road seemed to be changing. It was like the asphalt was shifting beneath my tires, making it difficult to maintain control of the car. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white from the pressure. I glanced in the rear view mirror, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road, shrouded in darkness. It was tall, with long, gangly limbs and a hunched posture. Its eyes seemed to glow in the dim light, and I felt a chill run down my spine. All I could do was stare, my eyes locked on the figure as it stood motionless in the road. It was like it was watching me, waiting for something. I felt a primal fear rising within me, urging me to escape this nightmare. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, the tires screeching in protest as I stood away from the town. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see. The road seemed to stretch on forever, but eventually the asphalt returned to normal, and the eerie atmosphere began to dissipate. I continued driving through the night, the adrenaline slowly wearing off as the miles passed. I couldn't stop thinking about that town and the strange figure I had seen. I knew I would never forget that night and the terror I had felt. Days later, I found myself at a roadside diner, still trying to process what had happened. As I sipped my coffee, I overheard an old man at the next table talking about a town that had been abandoned years ago after a series of unexplained disappearances. My blood ran cold as I realized he was talking about the same town I had settled upon. I knew I had been lucky to escape, and I wondered what would have happened if I had stayed. But one thing was certain: I would never forget that quiet, eerie town and the sinister figure that haunted it. The experience would stay with me forever, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks in the most unexpected places. I was taking a solo road trip to clear my head and get away from the hustle and bustle of city life. I decided to stop for a night in this small, quaint town I'd found in the map. It seemed like a nice place to rest and maybe grab a bite to eat. From what I'd seen online, it was known for its beautiful old buildings and friendly locals. I arrived in town just as the sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the picturesque streets. I checked into a cozy bed and breakfast, dropped off my bags, and decided to explore the town a bit before it got too dark. As I walked around, I noticed that the town was a bit quieter than I'd expected. The streets were practically empty, but I chalked it up to the fact that it was a weekday evening and people were probably at home with their families. I strolled past some charming little shops and cafes, making a mental note to visit them the next day. I eventually found my way to a small park in the center of town. The park was beautifully maintained, with flower beds and manicured lawns surrounding a glistening pond. I sat down on a bench to take in the peaceful atmosphere and watched the sun dip below the horizon. As I sat there, I noticed an older man sitting on another bench across the pond. He seemed to be staring at me intently, and I felt a little uncomfortable. I tried to ignore him, focusing on the beauty of the park and the gentle sound of the water in the pond. After a while, I decided it was time to head back to the bed and breakfast. As I stood up, I noticed that the older man was still watching me. He slowly rose from his bench and began walking in my direction. I felt a wave of fear wash over me, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe he just wanted to chat or ask for directions. As I started to walk back towards the B&B, I had this nagging feeling that there was someone following me. I glanced over my shoulder, and sure enough, he was only a few steps behind me. My heart began to race, and I quickened my pace, hoping to put some distance between us. As I continued walking, the man matched my speed, never falling too far behind. I felt a rising sense of panic, unsure of what to do. I didn't want to lead him back to where I was staying, but I didn't know where else to go. I decided to duck into one of the shops I had seen earlier. It was a small antique store, filled with shelves of old books and trinkets. I hurried inside, hoping the man wouldn't follow me. As I entered the shop, I was greeted by the friendly face of an elderly woman behind the counter. She welcomed me with a warm smile, asking if I needed help with anything. I didn't want to alarm her, so I just said I was browsing and started to look around the store. As I pretended to examine the various items, I nervously glanced out the window, trying to see if the man had followed me inside. To my relief, he seemed to have disappeared. I felt my heart rate slowly return to normal as I continued to browse the shop, eventually striking up a conversation with the shop owner. I casually mentioned my encounter with the man at the park, trying to gauge her reaction. She frowned and told me that there had been some reports of a strange man bothering tourists in the town. She advised me to be cautious and let someone know if I saw him again. Feeling somewhat reassured, I thanked her for her advice and left the shop. As I walked back to the B&B, I kept a vigilant eye out for the man but didn't see him again. I made it back without any further incidents and decided to spend the rest of the evening in the safety of my room. The next day, I ventured out into the town again, this time with a heightened sense of awareness. I visited the shops and cafes I had seen the previous evening and enjoyed the friendly atmosphere of the town. Despite my unsettling encounter, I really appreciated the charm and beauty of the place. As the day went on, I didn't see any sign of the man, and I began to feel more at ease. I enjoyed a leisurely lunch at a local cafe, chatting with the owner about the town's history and attractions. It seemed like my experience the previous night had been an isolated incident, and I was relieved to feel safe again. As I prepared to leave town the next morning, I felt a mix of emotions. I was grateful for the opportunity to explore such a charming place and meet its friendly locals, but I couldn't get myself to forget the nervousness I felt during my encounter with the strange man. I packed up my belongings and checked out of the B&B, thanking the owners for their hospitality. As I drove away from the town, I glanced in the rear view mirror, half expecting to see the man following me. But the streets were empty, and I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It seemed that my brush with danger was over, and I could continue my journey with a renewed appreciation for the importance of staying vigilant and trusting my instincts. Alright, so this one time my friends and I decided to visit a ghost town we heard about from some folks at college. It was supposed to be a weekend full of adventure and fun, exploring an abandoned place with a spooky reputation. We were all excited and couldn't wait to see what this ghost town had in store for us. We arrived in the late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the dusty streets. The town was just as eerie as we'd imagined, with decaying buildings and a sense of abandonment that sent shivers down our spines. We parked our car at the edge of town, grabbed our backpacks, and started exploring. As we walked through the town, we couldn't help but notice that it wasn't as deserted as we'd initially thought. There were a few locals lingering around, giving us curious and unsettling stares. We tried to ignore them, focusing on taking pictures and exploring the old buildings. As the sun started to set, we decided it was time to head back to our car and find a place to camp for the night. We'd noticed a few spots just outside of town that seemed perfect for setting our tents. But as we walked back to our car, we were being watched. As we reached our car, we realized that it had been vandalized. The tires were slashed, and there were broken bottles and graffiti all over the vehicle. Our hearts dropped, and we started to panic. We didn't know who would do something like this or why, but we knew we needed to get out of there as fast as possible. We quickly piled into the car, driving on the flat tires as best we could. We managed to make it a short distance out of town before we had no choice but to stop. The tires were completely shredded, and we knew we couldn't go any further. As we stood by the side of the road, trying to figure out what to do, we noticed that someone was still stalking us. A shadowy figure appeared at the edge of town, watching us intently. We couldn't make out any details, but it was clear that they were following us. Our hearts raced, and we knew we had to act fast. We decided to abandon the car and make a run for the woods nearby, hoping to find a place to hide until morning. As we sprinted towards the woods, we could hear the sound of footsteps and the shattering of glass as more bottles were thrown in our direction. We knew we were being chased, but we didn't dare look back. We just kept running, desperate to put as much distance between us and our pursuers as possible. Once we reached the woods, we stumbled upon a small clearing that seemed like a good place to hide. We held together, trying to catch our breath and figure out our next move. We knew we needed to find help, but we also didn't want to risk running into whoever was after us. As we sat there, we could hear the faint sound of footsteps approaching. The mysterious stalker had managed to track us down. We decided that our best bet was to split up and try to find our way back to the main road. If we could flag down a passing car or find a house, maybe we could get help. We each took off in a different direction, our hearts pounding in our chests as we tried to navigate the dark, unfamiliar woods. The sound of footsteps seemed to follow each of us, always just a few steps behind. We knew that whoever was chasing us wasn't going to give up easily. As we continued to run through the woods, we heard the distant sound of a car approaching. We all made our way towards the noise, hoping that it was our chance to escape. We finally reached the main road, our clothes torn and covered in dirt and sweat. As we stood on the side of the road, frantically waving our arms to flag down the approaching car, we kept staring back at the woods. The shadowy figure had stopped at the edge of the trees, watching us intently. As the car came to a stop beside us, the figure seemed to melt back into the darkness, disappearing from sight. We quickly explained our situation to the driver, who agreed to take us to the nearest town where we could get help. As we drove away from the ghost town and the nightmare we'd experienced, we had a sense of relief mixed with lingering fear. The weekend trip had turned into something none of us had ever anticipated. The ghost town lived up to its spooky reputation, and we were left with a chilling story to share for years to come. Upon reaching the nearest town, we went straight to the local police station to report the incident. The officers listened to our story with a mix of skepticism and concern. They informed us that they had received similar reports in the past, but they had never been able to find any concrete evidence or catch those responsible. They advised us to stay away from the town and promised to look into the matter again. But one thing was for sure, we would never visit that place again. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.